The primate in me is dying to get out of the man that I've become. This is a story of returning to a productive life after my death. Before I begin, I'd like to state for the record that I intentionally withheld the names of the perceived innocent. The last thing I need right now is someone to accuse me of slander or being disrespectful, regardless of how true the facts may be. I'm told to write a paper to discuss and describe a traumatic event. The task seemed easy enough, only 6 to 12 pages, single-spaced. I'm given a week and a half, and I'm feeling rushed. I'm not upset about this assignment. I actually couldn't wait to get it started. I looked at it as one more opportunity to get helped or judged. That somehow, more often than not, this will be misinterpreted as bitching, moaning, and complaining, or discredited as self-perceived, not actual, lack of support from the mental health system. I'm not mocking you. This is how you have said it. In contrast, it is you that have mocked me. Knowing how difficult it must be to complete an assignment like this, I guess the validity test wasn't enough, and so you continue to challenge me, again in disbelief. Only if you could see and accept the truth. It must be tough being trapped within the confines of your own physical self, that you can't see past the end of your own nose. See, that's what part of the problem is. You just don't get it, and probably never will, regardless of how many times someone tells you. I guess 3 years ago, I wouldn't have been much different, as I didn't understand or believe either until I have experienced it for myself. Of course, I wouldn't wish my experiences on you or anyone for that matter. I didn't understand how this assignment will be any different from the many others that I have written, or the words that I've verbally spoken or uttered. I continue to call out, cry, scream, and beg for understanding and help. You judge me, you mock me, write emails, and even talk about me. I'm confused how any of this can be productive to my recovery or continued treatment. I personally feel that this is another test to challenge my ability to reason and to communicate. Cognitive, recollection, and reasoning. Those are your terms, right? It may not please you or even disappoint you. Believe it or not, I began to write this right after leaving your office, and through all the distractions, interruptions, and many times I rewrote this, just through blank statements or words at this paper during its construction, I still don't feel like it is my best work or complete. You bet I have more to say. But how do you harness the attention of a brain that is obviously running wild in thought? I guess you do as I did, as I was obsessed in not being defeated. I just plugged away, aligning random thoughts until they formed near understandable paragraphs. You say, through some choice of words, that I'm judgmental, manipulative, and even over-dramatizing. I've only asked for your compassion and understanding, and I challenge you to get into my mind and spend a week there and see how you feel. Let's see what webs embrace you, shadows follow you, and memories haunt you. Let's see what you look like when you come out. Let's judge what scars you bear. Oh yeah, that's right. There are no physical scars or bruises, and that's why you don't believe me. That in some way, if I wanted or wished things to be different, I'd just make it so. Maybe I like who it is that I've become and the trouble that it has brought on me and my family. Maybe I wanted to bring my fast-tracking career to an abrupt halt with all this chaos, turmoil, and resistance. Maybe I'm a martyr or a glutton for punishment. Maybe I'm sadistic or even enjoy the pain. It's part of the ritual, Maybe I lack the discipline and motivation to pull myself up. Well, I will tell you that it is none of this and couldn't be further from the truth. I'd like to know, through yours or any other's years of college education, training, or experience, what gives you the right to be the judge, discount or discredit the accounts of another. Who died and appointed you God, or anyone for that matter? Why do you have to be so damn stubborn, uncooperative, and unwilling to change your old habits? How can your conscience and moral convictions allow you to continue to turn a blind eye and a deaf ear? See, if I asked, I bet you don't have any problem sleeping at night. For this, I can only pity you. Could it be that you don't want to go against the grain? Could your expression of a little compassion or understanding cost you your next promotion or make you unpopular? Is that your fear? See, I've not refused you or your help. I've taken your advice and your pills. I've followed your instructions, and I've committed myself. What have you done for me, other than allow me to come in here 130 times? You'd think after all this treatment I've received that I'd be well adapted and adjusted by now. I would like to think that you have an open mind and you're willing to take into consideration my best interest. Instead, through your own arrogance, you pompously parade around, unwilling to accept that things are subject to change and that you may be part of the problem. Is it so hard or difficult to admit that there have been errors, or worse, that mistakes have been made? What would be the result? What could the results lead to? Some verbal instruction or correction, a letter of concern or reprimand, the release from your position or podium? I'd like to believe, but know better, that you could be held more accountable. Maybe something like criminal charges of abuse, neglect, or negligence. I've posed the question that no one will answer. So I ask again, what is the difference from someone holding a gun to your head, demanding care, versus coming in non-threatening and being refused care or treatment, and you ultimately becoming responsible for when the hammer falls? See, when a soldier is found swinging on a rope, it's a disgrace. So we begin by acting shocked. Then we move to the soldier. The soldier must be weak or had options available. Then we move to the responsibility of the command. They were asked, where was the squad leader? And they play the blame game all the way up to the commander. Of course, the commander should have known and should have done more to protect the soldier by having his immediate supervisor babysit him, take things away from him, and even humiliate the soldier when the secret comes out. Now I ask, if this soldier was seen in this clinic, received prescriptions and medication, and was under your care and observation, how are you so easily dismissed of any responsibility? Oh, I know. It's all in how the paperwork is written up. You should be more responsible because you are aware of the medication, the treatment, and the possible side effects, and the personal thoughts, and the discouragement, and the desperation of the individual soldier and his intent. I guess for now, I'll keep my nose out of all that. See, I'm not liked by many anymore, and that's not my problem. What happened to this good soldier that towed the line, followed instructions, was tactful and respectful, was dedicated to the unit, was selfless, humble, patient, and who cared? Could it be that this guy that was so highly regarded, respected, and even honored was bullied, antagonized, and even pushed too far? Could it be that he was victimized and re-victimized, and victimized again just for good measure? Could it be that this super soldier with a capital S had a weakness, a flaw, a breaking point, or even a boundary to this threshold that continued to endure the pain and the persecution? Those that think they know me say I'm no longer submissive, nor do I accept the first rejection I get. They say I'm aggressive and easily angered or enraged. Some say I'm sarcastic, controlling, needy, manipulative, argumentative, antagonizing, and even intimidating. Some say I'm impulsive, or others compulsive. A few have said I'm even immature, lack self-control and discipline. Some say that I'm very demanding, direct, and just plain blunt when I say what comes out of my mind. Some say I don't give a damn anymore. My favorite is that I've been called mean, nasty, and unfair. Regardless of what other names I may be known as, I'm still Sergeant First Class Hoops, a non-commissioned officer and a soldier in the United States Army. So I demand the dignity and the respect that comes with such a title and will accept nothing less. So I ask you, where did all this come from? Because if you ask my wife or anyone else for that matter, that knew me before I deployed, they would tell you that I came back, and when I did, I had seriously changed and that I continued to worsen. Isn't it against the laws of nature for a rock to turn into a scorpion or wasp? Isn't it treatment and assignments like this paper that are supposed to make things nicer, easier to get along with, or even more patient? Yes, you ask about trauma. I can give you a very good example. I returned from 3 tough years as a recruiter with less than a month to prepare for combat and deploy. I didn't have a problem with deploying, as I was re-energized by returning to my own kind and after being given a squad of soldiers to look after. I had to get medically cleared by a cardiologist just to deploy. Bet you didn't know that. So this was my opportunity to get out of deploying if I really didn't want to go. Was I looking forward to it? Of course not. Who wants to leave their pregnant wife and children? I was bound to duty and answered America's call. While deployed, things were tough, although I still suggested things were tougher in recruiting and that most who didn't know better should quit their complaining. I was quick to remind anyone that would listen that the grass was not always greener on the other side. Oh yeah, I had problems while deployed. I had 3 alpha she-males that seemed to hate men, especially white ones. I felt important when I was the least liked of everyone. It meant I must be doing my job. Now the red tape, changing of rules of engagement, and the constant changing in politics at the base camp in Kuwait did not make my job any easier. Then the challenge of dealing with the complacence of junior soldiers who thought, because they had been there before, that they knew it all. I referred to them as the walking dead, because it would be through their complacence that they would die, or someone else would die trying to save their lousy butts. I'd say I had my hands full. Of course, I took losses hard, and I took a lot of responsibility for their survival upon myself. Yes, I have regrets and guilt of some things I saw and that I did. I worked longer hours, got less sleep, just to ensure that my soldiers and equipment were always ready and prepared for anything. Like somehow all my extra effort or work could actually make the difference. Who's to say that it didn't? Me. Honestly, I could not do enough. When you plant a seed, you expect it to grow. If you lead by a good example, you expect people to follow. I was working with the walking dead. My platoon acted like they lived a life without consequences, like they were numb by it all. Nothing seemed to bother them or snap them out of it. They liked to take pictures of terrible things that they later would share with their friends. I had no part in taking pictures, and yet these things are burned into my memory, and I want no part of them, but they've become a part of me. Now, through my efforts, I returned from a combat zone with a back injury that none of my physicians believe I had. Oh yeah, they run their tests so that they can say that they did their job and maybe sleep at night, but because initial tests are negative, they continue to disbelieve. So I fought with my unit and healthcare providers repeatedly over months, while I still had this unexplained pain. Finally, someone listened to my symptoms and decided, without regard to the cost, to run the right tests. Yes, they discovered something, but it was still not the root of the pain. Some more time is wasted. I'm diagnosed with a leg-length indifference, given an orthotic insert for my shoes, an inflammatory medication for pain, and I'm told to drive on. After a few months of enduring the worsening pain, it's decided that I need to go in for chiropractic care. They too, after multiple visits, ask why I'm even there. They claim that there's nothing that they can do and didn't see anything wrong. I'm directed to return to my original healthcare provider, who once again dismisses my pain. I fight for another 3 months before they run another test and decide that I have degenerative disc disease. This is an additional 3 months before I can get an appointment with the orthopedic surgeon. They describe Vicodin, however, this doesn't even break the edge. I, like many others, decide to self-medicate myself with nightcaps of hard liquor and cocktails. At least it was legal and would break the edge so that I could somewhat interact and relate to my wife and my kids. I finally get an appointment for the orthopedic surgeon, but she doesn't see any reason for my pain and concludes that I'm not a candidate for surgery and only offers physical therapy treatment. So I get a profile, more narcotic medicine to help minimize the pain. Now, I didn't consider myself a PT stud, just that competitive asshole running next to you that was giving you my all. My motivation was always that I'd be damned before I'd let that fat boy beat me. Yes, friendly competition, self-desire, and motivation. It used to motivate the hell out of me when I saw defeat and a desire to quit in someone else's eyes. I'd egg them on and try to motivate them, and just when they were keeping up, I would take off, motivated myself. Seemed selfish and like an asinine thing, but hey, it was my thing and my mark. Now I'm limited to this pain in the back of my legs and my back that I can't run and keep up with the big boys anymore. Nothing changed, as there's still no answers, and I'm bounced around like a pinball. During this frustrating process, it is discovered that because of my anger outbursts and through threats of harming someone, that I'm a good candidate for PTSD. This in itself is a whole other can of worms. I'm instructed to go to the R&R Center on a self-referral. I go there, and because I lack a plan to harm myself or another, I'm turned away. Things continue to get bad at work as I begin getting treated differently. I'm stereotyped, stigmatized, ostracized because they can't see my pain. So I enlist the help of my command. My commander sends me off with an escort and a command referral to a psychiatrist evaluation. After a long wait, I am finally seen by someone to conduct the initial intake. The whole time I'm in his office, his body language and the frequency of him checking his watch leads me to the conclusion that he was not listening and could care less what I was saying. The formal finding was that I was fit for duty and that I should seek treatment and therapy for PTSD. I was given no instructions as far as how all this was supposed to work. My conclusion was that it was lunchtime and he had no idea what the hell he was talking about. When I returned to work, it was suggested that I step back from my position as a squad leader and allow my assistants to take over, freeing me to make and keep these appointments. I was instructed that nothing would change. However, I was made to attend and stand at the rear of the formation and was left out of the loop when it came to disseminating information pertaining to the who, what, where, when, and how. The assistant platoon sergeant, Alpha She-Male 2, stood at the front of the formation and referred to me when she said, "Crazy back there can't do it because he's got a psychiatrist's appointment." This was the very start of intense stigma that I would have to endure until I left the battalion. As things began to change for the worse at work and at home, I encountered more frequent outbursts of anger and rage. Not knowing what to do with all this built-up emotion and pain, I once again returned to the R&R Center. This time not being too much different from the last, I was again turned away. I was now frustrated and enraged, so I went to the 5th floor of the hospital and told them that I was going to kill myself and that I had a plan and the means and determination. I told the sergeant first class at the desk that she would be doing me a favor if she just took my bootlaces and belt and placed me in protective custody. I just needed a quiet, safe place to rest. She didn't know what to do. She instructed me to return to the R&R Center. This was, of course, the place that they were best suited to address my situation, she said. I told her that I just came from there and that they had turned me away. Like I said, she didn't know what to do, and she turned me away. It wasn't until I returned to the R&R Center pounding irrationally on their counter and demanding to speak to someone in charge that I was taken seriously. A few people got involved at the clinic that day. I was seen again for another initial intake. I was seen by a psychiatrist who provided a prescription of medication and follow-up appointments for continued treatment. My unit was notified that I would be returning to work with limitations and appointments. When I returned to the unit, it was suggested that I was going to be reassigned as an instructor or to headquarters platoon, both of which would leave me on rear detachment and make me non-deployable. This is not what I wanted. This was not what I expected, but I'd take whatever help was available. So I'm still in disbelief that any of this is real and how it could be happening to me. Remember, I'm a super soldier with a capital S. I was honored with the Soldier's Medal for saving a drowning child. I endured 3 rough years as a recruiter in one of the toughest areas during one of the most difficult times in our nation's history. We're fighting multiple wars on multiple fronts. How could it be that I have a genetic disposition or weakness that others that encounter the same traumatic situations are less affected? What's wrong with me? Why me? Yes, I was in denial. I wouldn't say that things had began to stabilize, but I was moved to headquarters platoon as the platoon sergeant preparing to push the unit out on their deployment. I did everything asked of me and more. No one seemed to have any complaints. One day, a sergeant delayed his promotion until his family could arrive to share in his experience. But because of the rain and the delay of the proceedings, it occurred indoors. I was prepared to read the orders. My first sergeant gave me the thumbs up to begin. When I was interrupted by the commander, who said, "Hold your horses there, crazy." I was humiliated in front of all those who had gathered, who joined in by laughing at her remarks about me. I continued to sustain and push the company off and supported them in every way, and yet I was not a part of it all. I just didn't have to take care of the soldiers and the family of the rear detachment, but also the 312 soldiers that had deployed forward. It was no secret that I was in the rear detachment, and I was the rear detachment platoon sergeant. And yet, in early January, after viewing a copy of my most recent non-commissioned officer evaluation report, my commander and first sergeant flagged me with an X-ray alpha code for having PTSD and not deploying. Through quite a bit of effort and many trips to the battalion command sergeant major, the inspector general, and the brigade command sergeant major, I was finally afforded the opportunity to communicate on what I was flagged for. My first sergeant, who was deployed, claimed that I'd come to him crying and saying that I had wished no longer to be a squad leader anymore. This was not a matter of fact. The evidence didn't support this, and yet he stood his ground and supported the commander in this flag. After hearing this, the battalion command sergeant major dismissed me from his office so that they could continue this conversation about me and without me and any of my input. There was no resolution. The intent of the flag was a weak attempt at blocking my consideration for promotion through the centralized promotion system. I went to the adjutant general, the inspector general, equal opportunity, chaplain services, and patient advocate services, and there was no one that could or would offer any direction, advice, or assistance. The result of this phone conversation between the battalion command sergeant major and the forward first sergeant was that, in addition to me being flagged, 6 additional soldiers would also be flagged. I knew that this was done in an attempt to ensure that it did not seem personal or intentional that I was singled out. I initiated a congressional through Congressman John Carter to address this and other concerns, to include the inability to get medical and mental health support. When the Army responded, I couldn't believe that the congressman's office accepted their response. It was weak. It didn't address my main concerns, and it sounded more like a press release. The battalion commander did get involved after the congressional and notified my forward commander via email that she would immediately remove the erroneous flags. Repeated attempts to get a response were being ignored. Finally, the battalion commander sent an email stating that my company commander would comply or be relieved, and that she would acknowledge. All the soldiers with the erroneous flags, regardless of their work restrictions, conditions, medications, or profiles, were singled out and ordered to hold a separate formation to be addressed by the battalion commander early in the morning. Most of the company within the battalion knew what was going on, and yet there was not a responsible leader amongst them that would stand up and address how inappropriate this situation could be perceived. More congressional inquiries from these soldiers within the formation did follow. Back at the R&R Center, my treatment, or lack thereof, continued. I was attending a PTSD group, combat stress group, individual counseling, and medication management. I continued and completed biofeedback, anger management, and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. As a result of my actions during the PTSD group, it was insisted that I take a validity test of more than 300 questions. The results were received and explained to me that I had anxiety. Of course, I could have figured that out and told them about it, and that I was borderline bipolar, mainly mania. A summary and conclusions of the test was handed over to my medication provider, and I was on a daily cocktail of medications. My conditions did not improve, so my provider began to speak of initiating a medical evaluation board. Back at the unit, I continued to be victimized by the many of the 312 soldiers that were deployed through phone conversations and emails. The Sergeant First Class list came out, and I was told on numerous occasions by many soldiers how I was the most popular guy in both Kuwait and Iraq as I continued to be talked about. It seemed that everyone knew of the situation and wanted to voice an opinion about it. Understanding that the forward deployed First Sergeant and Commander should have been the only ones involved, and with any knowledge of the situation, I concluded that they must have put the information out. This was later confirmed when a soldier who had returned from Iraq for medical reasons informed me that the commander had a formation to put out that she had received a reprimand and wanted rumor control. Like I said, I received phone calls where people were rude, cursed at me, and even said things like, "Oh, hell no, I'm not going to speak to this effer." Others were rude and threatened by email, which I saved as evidence. I took sworn statements, facts, and evidence to my battalion command sergeant major and expressed that I did not feel that it was in my best interest or the interest of the unit that I remain in the unit when they returned. After many refused requests, I brought it to the R&R Center and requested the involvement of an officer, not a civilian, to notify my commander how bad the situation could turn out. My battalion commander and battalion command sergeant major waited until the very last day to relocate me within the battalion. I had received instructions 2 weeks prior that I'd be holding the responsible position of battalion R&U. In other words, I'd be climbing stairs with a back injury of the surrounding barracks, ensuring that all lights, fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, and washers and dryers were in place and functional. Prior to leaving my unit, the process of my medical evaluation board was initiated. Now, after a lot of patience and the involvement of a few influential people, I finally moved again to another unit within the battalion. I was instructed that although I outranked the staff sergeants who were the unit commander and first sergeant, I would not try to take over or to give them any problems. I had a profile by now that said that I should not be placed in any position requiring responsibility. I'm not to have access to weapons and not have a leadership position. This was an attempt to minimize the stress and eliminate triggers. More often than not, there was nothing for me to do. I still was required to come in daily on time, and although there was nothing for me to do and I was instructed to not hang out in the office, I was required to remain in the immediate area just in case something changed. So I spent the majority of 4 months from 9 to 5 in my car. Others might have thought that this arrangement would be great, get paid for doing nothing. I wish I wasn't so anxious, consumed by thoughts and self-dialogue, that I could have actually done something or maybe even rested. However, this was not the case. I was under close observation, supervision, and of course, on my best behavior as always. I'm tasked with running a squad and filling in for the commander and the first sergeant on occasion, reminded by the fact that my stay was to be short while the paperwork for my transfer to the medical processing company was being processed. I waited over 4 months while everyone in the battalion knew my business and was airing my laundry. The commander of my old unit, as a first order of business upon her return, initiated an MMRB for me. You'd think with an acronym like this, it would be a good thing. Not the case. It wasn't. This MMRB was to determine my fitness for duty and an attempt to end my career in another way. She knew I was going through a medical evaluation board, but somehow thought that this would do me in because she was unable to initiate separation under a chapter. What did I ever do other than do my job that was ever got her so upset that she would show this much hatred? I'm feeling pretty important by now. I've got a lot of people wishing harm to come my way. I had my car keyed, tires flattened, and although I can't prove it, someone drove through my neighborhood with a pellet gun and knocked out the windows on my sister-in-law's car that was sitting in the driveway. Well, I'm eventually moved to 3 Corps Medical Processing Company. I'm going slowly through the MEB process while I wait on paperwork from my doctors. Finally, the MEB comes back approved and waits my signature. I take the advice and recommendation of my counselor, and I read it and reread it and read it again. Every time I'm getting more and more upset, not only at the observations and recommendations. These are arguably small potatoes. I was more upset at the carelessness of the many administrative errors. I was obsessed with finding each and every one of them and having them correct each last one. It didn't matter to me that these errors would probably be overlooked by most, to include the board. It was a matter of principle. You pay a person to do a job, they should do that job to the best of their abilities without distractions and interruptions that lead to errors. This is my paperwork. It was to best represent me. Like I said, I'm obsessed with the small details. Well, I guess my appeal to the MEB was not taken lightly, as I noticed a difference in treatment from my providers after submitting my appeal. So you can now call me suspicious or paranoid, but does it go without any reason? So let's pretend for a moment that none of us have the answer, that we're still learning and discovering what is happening to us. Let us look at it from a social perspective. What would the result be to anyone who was constantly in pain, persecuted, punished, judged, ridiculed, rejected, neglected, and subjected to stigma and ostracized? Could a normal man have his dignity, self-esteem, motivation, and self-worth blindly stripped away layer by layer? Could he become a prisoner of his own mind? Would he be overwhelmed with everything and everywhere and everyone? Would he feel that his life was worthless and without meaning? How about if he felt helpless and hopeless? Now, what would happen to the same man who discovers all these negative effects have wreaked havoc on his life, lifestyle, and very livelihood? Could you be optimistic long enough to understand that a near lifeless creature still has the same sense to defend itself? Could you blame this creature for defending itself? Remember, this creature is in pain, feeling near death, and willing to hold on to whatever chance at survival is left. Although you come to help, how are you any different from the rest? Remember, to the injured creature, you look like them, you smell like them, you even sound like them who injured this creature in the first place. Why should I place hope for my life and survival in you? How is your help any different? How are you different? Some examples of wanting to harm myself or another would be stopping to purchase a gun. This has happened on more than one occasion. Another example would be to gather information, personal, family, habits, and patterns on someone that I had a run-in with. I've gone as far and to the extent of following a coworker to her residence, or otherwise stalking, I guess. I once came up with a bomb plan that was so quick and detailed, it took about 5 minutes to come up with all the who, what, where, when, and how, without any research, and I'm not an explosive subject matter expert either. My wife was a witness to this, and it scared her terribly. I've not been seen by a medication provider for more than a month and a half now. When I'm finally seen and get this appointment, she is late in starting the appointment and acts in a hurry like something was more important or my fault. She has a prescription written for a new drug within 5 minutes of opening the visit. Is this right? I took a list of all my problems into her and even read it to her. It was okay, she didn't face me, to listen as she was typing on her keyboard. She assures me that it was okay though, because she can multitask. I could have told her that I had a gun in my pocket, and she didn't seem to be listening, as displayed by the well-placed passive acknowledgments. Yes, I understand. Oh, really? And the such. The best I get is a silver bullet and the assurance that next week you should try to get a follow-up appointment for the next month out. I'm sure I've missed or overlooked something, but I'm tired and bored of repeating myself. I've been more faithful to my treatment than my treatment has been to me. At this point, I've lost faith in the medical treatment staff and their qualifications to treat me. I personally don't think that any of them know what the hell they're talking about, and I go with the flow, the new treatment of the month, the treatment advice of the physician's journal, or the most recent publication. I'm not suggesting that they don't want to find the answer or something that works, but they just keep on throwing the treatment plans into the fan, and whatever comes back will be the next thing that we try. You know, this act of practicing medicine. No real science, just trial and error at my expense. So don't be surprised when I get upset or badmouth some of my care providers of the past. They prematurely patted themselves and others on the back and giving each other high fives for their success stories. What is missing is I'm currently not one of them. So pass me around like holiday fruitcake, no pun intended, until the cure is uncovered. I get put out of the army or until I off myself, whichever comes first. Just throw another medication at me without looking into it or listening to my history. Tell me that you'll have a follow-up visit with me in a couple weeks or in a month to measure my progress. What do I know about symptoms, side effects? I'm just the patient, remember? I'm the one that has to deal with all this. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I don't know why it even matters. I don't even know why you're still listening. So soon, the Army will permanently put me out and the treatment will stop. And then what about the VA? You know, am I expected to get better someday? And then there's the remaining occasion, which I mentioned earlier. Whatever comes first.